alive. Too bad you will die.
As long as the portal remains open, your world becomes my world.
I am yet to see a live-action adaptation of a video game that I have liked to date. So when I heard that CD Projekt Red had announced that a live-action project is in the works, I wasn't sure how to feel. It is unclear whether this will be a TV show or a movie, but the studio Anonymous include a team of veterans responsible for hits like Mr. Robot and True Detective. CDPR does have experience with this type of endeavor and recently made Edgerunners with the anime studio Trigger. This was of course a hit success, so fans are rightfully very hopeful that they can repeat their own history, this time in live action. When you have shows like Edgerunners and Arcane adapting games so successfully, surely one shouldn't be so skeptical, right? Unfortunately, for every Arcane and Edgerunners, you have 10 absolutely abysmal productions. There are, of course, a few exceptions to the rule. HBO's The Last of Us is a great example, and I think they did a fantastic job. However, these are few and far between. And let's be honest here, The Last of Us game was written like a TV show in the first place. I want CD Projekt to succeed. I want them to prove the statistics wrong. In order to help them, I have 5 recommendations at the end of the video, but they will not make sense until we discuss why most live-action adaptations fail. Let's start off with the most obvious hurdle, and that is the runtime. Video games have the luxury of being as long or as short as they need to be. I'm going to give you guys an example. I've spent over 200 hours in Baldur's Gate 3, almost 300 hours in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and over 470 hours in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. I think I would be very critical of any adaptations of these games because I know them very intimately. In fact, I recently heard that Netflix was considering adapting Baldur's Gate 3, and my heart sank. I will be creating a video on this particular endeavor by Netflix, and if you're interested in that video, do consider subscribing so you're notified when that video is uploaded. Back on topic. Televisions and movies do not have the luxury of an unlimited runtime. In the case of a movie, the story needs to be told from start to finish within a maximum of roughly 2 hours. TV, in essence, has an advantage in this regard, as there is more screen time for characters, plots, settings, and themes to be fleshed out. Notably, both Arcane and Edgerunners were both TV shows, of course. Regardless of the format, elements of the video game will need to be left out in order to accommodate for the limited time available. The filmmaking studio will need to make tough decisions on what is considered core to the experience that players felt when playing the video game. They need to distill the essence of the video game so that only the essentials remain, and then work with that to create a story that can be shown on the big screen. However, even after this distillation process, there will still be elements that are not passed from the video game to the screen. This is not unique to video games, and it happens with all media that is adapted. For example, the Lord of the Rings movies, as fantastic as they were, still omitted large portions of the books. For video games in particular, the internal dialogue of a character is completely lost in the transition process. Gamers will have memories of the internal thoughts of a character, their internal monologue, diary entries, as well as the narration that a game might provide. However, in a film, you're not able to hear the internal monologue, and unless executed very, very well or in a stylistic manner, the actor should not voice the internal monologue. Let's give you an example of what I mean by this. In the Witcher game, Geralt is often noted to be monologuing internally to himself, sometimes about his surroundings, and sometimes about the quest that he is undertaking. This gives us an insight into what the character is thinking, and since you are in control of Geralt, this does not feel awkward. Then let's look at Netflix's Witcher. I know it is technically based on the books, but it highlights this issue regardless. At least to me. This adaptation found it very difficult to convey the internal monologue and thoughts of a character like Geralt. Henry Cavill, an actor I truly respect and adore, tried his very best to bring out the soul of the character. However, I feel like the show at times stretched and exaggerated his character to compensate for the fact that he has a very quiet personality. This leads to my next point with regards to the fundamental difference between video games and film media, and that is that of immersion. Both video games and film media are a form of escapism. You are trying to leave the real world behind to experience, often fantastical, stories and worlds. However, the key difference between films and video games is that when you play a video game, you are fully immersed. You are the driving force that propels the story, and, most importantly, you are part of the story. How your actions in a video game affect you is a completely unique experience. Even though a video game might be linear with the same set plays for every player, depending on how the player chose to trigger that set play, it might trigger a unique emotional response and/or feeling of accomplishment. Video games, in most situations, give the player a feeling of experiencing a story from a first-person point of view. And by this, I don't mean the actual point of view of the game itself, but rather the fact that you are experiencing the story directly. Developers produce games so that you as the player are the director of your own story. Film media, on the other hand, is not afforded this luxury. It has to be told in the third person. You are not the director of these stories. You are merely an outsider looking into a world presented to you by the filmmaker, through the portal of your TV screen, for example. Although a movie or a TV series may be memorable to you, you will never feel that you were ever part of that story. On top of this, certain video games do not translate well into live action, but might work better in an animated format. Games, in essence, are a fantasy, and the fantasy of a video game is almost limitless. Visual effects can be otherworldly and over the top, for example. Film adaptations can indeed recreate the same fantastical experience. However, more time and dedication might need to be spent on CGI and special effects to do this correctly. Since animation is not based in realism per se, unlike live action, they usually tend to do better in the fantastical adaptations. Arcane and Edgerunners are examples in this regard, where you have magic in the case of Arcane, and futuristic cyberware in the case of Edgerunners. On top of all this pressure, studios also need to remain authentic to appeal to the primary target audience in that of a game's players. For example, I think it is almost always a terrible idea to cast the protagonist or any other main character of a video game with rich lore into a movie. When your main target audience is gamers, they will likely know the character inside out, and a half-hearted attempt at portraying the character will be immediately noticed and criticized. This is especially problematic when studios promise to faithfully adapt video games to the big screen, as it will almost always lead to severe backlash if, or more realistically, when the studios fail. A notable exception to this is of course the Arcane TV series, which featured multiple champions from the video game League of Legends, but still managed to tell its story authentically. The reason for this is quite simple. Lore and story is not a main focus of the game, which is a competitive MOBA. There is some lore selectively, but with over 150 champions currently, a lot of the lore is fragmented and not nearly as cohesive as an RPG game. As a result, Arcane could use these champions as a blank canvas in their show and tell their origin stories, as players did not have much idea about them anyway. By accurately portraying the major cities of Piltover and Zon, with fantastic art direction and screenwriting, The adaptation appealed to not only the primary target audience of League of Legends players, but also had the liberty to appeal to a wider audience by exploring dramatic themes that non-gamers would also enjoy. In fact, the same could be said of Edgerunners by CD Projekt Red themselves, which remained authentic by representing Night City accurately, which gave them the freedom to follow a more typical anime story that appealed to a diverse audience without alienating the gamer fanbase. However, problems do occur when studios have to deal with political influence in the modern age and have to adapt to meet those requirements. The issue with this is that by accommodating political correctness, the films might alienate the target audience in the form of gamers. I'm going to pick on Netflix's Witcher again, mostly because it portrays the issue well, but also because they ruined a franchise dear to me. But we keep things professional on this channel.
Specifically just to my experience, because I am writing an adaptation. It's what I was hired to do. And once I started thinking about that, when I sold The Witcher, I started thinking about all of the other people who might not see themselves represented in fantasy either. Because let's be honest, fantasy has often been told through a white male perspective. Obviously, it's a book that was written at a certain time. It was written by a Polish author, and I had a feeling that most people imagine these characters to be white only. And was that important to the stories that we were telling? And the resounding answer was no. It was actually much more important to tell a story that could resonate with a larger population of the world. I'm trying to tell stories where other people who may have had my experience can also find themselves in The Witcher. And that includes making characters have different skin colors than perhaps fans imagined. Do I believe it's the right thing? I do. I really do. I think that this is a global show, that I have an opportunity to bring it to not just a couple million people, but hundreds of millions of people.
As a non-white person myself, I want to see more people of color in films, TV shows, and video games. I do not, however, ever appreciate when a studio race changes an existing character, because not only is it a disservice to the soul of the original character, but it also insults the minorities that they are trying to present. This is because race changing, in essence, is a very lazy way of inclusivity by studios. Why is inclusivity important, you might ask? Well, there are two main reasons. The first is public image. By having a racially diverse cast, a studio will appear to be more inclusive and thereby gain more popularity. The second reason is monetary. By having a racially diverse cast, you appeal to a wider audience, and thereby your show or film might make more money in the long run. Well, that's well and good, but why do I think that it is lazy to race change? Well, I'll explain. The correct way of including people from a minority in a TV show or a movie is to cast a new character. Disney's upcoming movie Wish, which I am extremely excited for, casts a non-white princess as the protagonist. I think this is the correct way of doing things. So why don't studios do this then? Well, it's quite simple really. Creating a new character is a risk. The new character might not appeal so much to fans. And if the character does not resonate with audiences, it might hurt the revenue that a film or TV series make at the end of the day. And as I've established multiple times already, money is what drives most films and TV shows. So why take that risk and create a new character from a minority ethnic background when you can simply and lazily race change an existing character and limit any sort of risk? Problems occur when studios place a disproportionate emphasis on political agendas and don't stay true to the soul of the video game that they are adapting, and thereby alienate the fan base of the game. And I know what you're thinking. Well, if there are so many issues with adapting video games, why make video game adaptations in the first place? Again, it boils down to nothing else but cold, hard cash. To demonstrate this, I accessed CBR's list of the top 10 worst video game adaptations of all time, and I created a table with their budgets, gross revenue, and net profits. Unsurprisingly, many of these endeavors made a lot of money. Moreover, even the films that did poorly were very low budget to begin with, and the losses were not significant, with the worst performing adaptation being BloodRayne at negative 22 million net. Filmmakers in general are not gamers. To them, a game's fanbase are a guaranteed audience that will watch their video game adaptation, and with there being such little risk involved, they would be stupid to not capitalize on this. This is the exact same reason why we will not get more pro-consumer studios like Larian, when gamers are willing to spend their money on greedy, exploitative companies. However, I like CD Projekt Red, and I like their games, and I want them to succeed. So, here are my recommendations for CD Projekt Red and Anonymous. Please note, these are of course my opinions. You might have different opinions, and if so, please do share them in the comment section below, and hopefully it can generate some positive and respectful discussion. Number 1. Make a compelling TV show or film first. What do I mean by this? Well, when you look at Edgerunners or Arcane, the reason they were so successful is because fundamentally they were very good TV shows, with elements that appealed to audiences of all backgrounds. The video game inspirations for the shows were there, but they did not overshadow the quality of the story that was told, and did not forcefully insert fan service. Number 2. Limit the role that video game characters play in the plot of the story. It might be a great idea to include some characters from the game in the live action. However, I would advise against casting a character integral to the plot of Cyberpunk 2077. Gamers will know these characters intimately, and even small inaccuracies in their presentation will be noticed and authenticity will come into question. If you're going to include characters from the game, limit their involvement, or better yet, include characters featured minimally in the game so that their stories can be told on the screen instead. Avoid political agendas. Now this might be a personal opinion, but I will be open about it. In the game, in Night City, there are a lot of things that might not be considered politically correct in the real-world society. However, similar to video games, TV shows and movies are fantasy. They're not real. I really hope that CD Projekt Red will represent Night City accurately and not omit themes and the general atmosphere of the city. And of course, I've already made my opinions on race changing very clear. Number 4. Do not skimp on CGI and special effects. When playing games, I'm a firm believer that graphics are not as important as the gameplay itself. However, fortunately or unfortunately, Cyberpunk is a visually stunning game, and you can do very unrealistic things in it, and that's okay because it's a game. Edgerunners, being an anime, could easily adapt some of the more over-the-top effects seen in the video game. For example, David's Sandvistan or Lucy's monowire. By having good CGI and effects in the live action, they will be able to bring the soul of Night City onto the big screen, and thereby keep the authenticity of the game in check. And number 5, include as many Easter eggs as you can. CD Projekt Red did an absolutely fantastic job at this in Edgerunners, and the show was peppered with Easter eggs in the form of cyberware, weapons, vehicles, factions, and the general atmosphere of Night City itself. Of course, David's apartment, being the same apartment as V's, was also a nice touch. It's a very easy way to connect to the gamer audience while still giving the studio the freedom to tell a unique story that might appeal to a wider audience as well. A bonus tip for CD Projekt Red is to not retell the story of Cyberpunk 2077. You cannot condense the whole plot of Cyberpunk 2077 into a TV show or a movie. It's just not feasible. Tell a unique story. And thankfully, from the sources that I've seen online, this seems to be the case, that it's going to be an original story. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have your own thoughts or opinions on the matter, please do leave them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, of course, please do leave a like. And of course, consider subscribing. I'm trying to grow this channel and I'm going to be making a lot of videos going forward. On this channel, we do a lot of lore. We also do some game analysis and also discussions, gaming discussions like this video today. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'll see you very soon. Until next time.